I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for a fantastic evening. My name is Sean Miller, and I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, and also the chair of the Marjorie Hinckley Chair Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 9th Annual Marjorie Hinckley Lecture. First, we'd like to make you aware that we're very pleased that tonight we have all 5 of President and Sister Hinckley's children here with us. 3 of Sister Hinckley's siblings are also attending, as well as several of her grandchildren. We extend a warm welcome to faculty and students in the community and hope that you enjoy tonight's lecture. We'd also like to recognize that tonight we have Academic Vice President Brent W. Webb and his wife Amy, along with Associate Academic Vice President Craig Hart and his wife Christine with us this evening. I want to express appreciation to the Hinckley Chair Committee, Advisory Committee, which consists of Jane Dudley, Gordon Lim, Dean Busby, Jeff Reber, Tina Dykes, and Dean Ben Ogles for their ongoing work in overseeing the wonderful resource that is the Marjorie Hinckley Chair. Much of tonight's event was organized by Kim Reed, Patricia Wilson and Robin Shumway in the Dean's Office, and Charlene Clark and Nancy Schumpert in the School of Social Work. So please join me in expressing appreciation for the efforts of many here tonight. We as a college are honored to perpetuate Sister Hinckley's legacy through this chair. Tonight we're delighted to announce that tonight's Marjorie Hinckley Lecture will be delivered by Dr. Frank Fincham, eminent scholar and director of Florida State University's Family Institute. Professor Fincham will be introduced by Nate Lambert, a faculty member in the School of Family Life and one of Dr. Fincham's former students. Dr. Lambert.
It is with great honor that I'd like to introduce Frank Fincham, tonight's Hinckley lecturer. Frank is currently an eminent scholar and director of the Family Institute at Florida State University. He earned his PhD in psychology from Oxford University. A few of his notable accomplishments include publishing over 300 journal articles and book chapters during his illustrious career. Rather than slowing down later in his career, as many do, Frank is speeding up. He's averaged 21 publications a year during the last 2 years and currently has 27 articles in press. His work has been cited by well over 16,000 times. And he has been listed by the American Psychology Society Observer as being among the top 25 psychologists in the world in terms of number of citations per article. In addition, he has been awarded dozens of research grants totaling well over $9 million. On a personal note, Frank is an outstanding individual. He's the loving father of 3 children. As my research advisor during graduate school, I found Frank to be very supportive, enthusiastic, and fun. He has taught me volumes about conducting high-caliber research for which I am deeply grateful. I know that President and Sister Hinckley would be proud of the moral courage Frank has demonstrated by researching the politically incorrect topic of prayer. The Hinckley's would also love Frank's research on forgiveness, about which Dr. Fincham will speak tonight. The title of his talk is "Till Lack of Forgiveness Doth Us Part, Forgiveness in Marriage." We'll now be pleased to hear from Dr. Frank Fincham.
I'd like to begin by giving you an idea of what I'll be talking about tonight. I'm going to start off by giving you a context for my comments and then ask a very simple question: what is forgiveness? And does it really matter? And then we're going to get more personal. Is it relevant to my relationship, each one of us in this room? What are the dangers that I should watch out for? And can forgiveness be taught? Is it something I can become better at? And then I'll offer a few concluding comments. Okay, I'll start with the Minority Report. The 2010 census now shows that the majority of US households are headed by unmarried persons, making being married the new minority. This is a tragedy in my view. Forgiveness research has not always been with us. What we have seen is that scientific studies have only emerged very recently. In fact, there were only 5 scientific studies prior to 1985, despite the existence of this concept through millennia of human history. But there's been an explosion of research in recent years. For example, there are 119 peer-review articles on forgiveness that were published last year alone. So this topic has come into its own in the scientific community, which makes it very important for me to provide a clear context for what I'm going to be talking about. Forgiveness can be seen through a secular lens and a religious lens. It's especially central to the Abrahamic faith, although you can find it in other religions as well. I will be saying not a word about that. What I will be doing is focusing on a secular view of forgiveness, which can be either prescriptive and moral, what forgiveness should be. This literature is mainly written by philosophers, and there's another literature that is descriptive, and that's where I'm located, in the descriptive literature on forgiveness. Now, in that literature, there are conceptual and empirical answers that are possible to the question that I pose: what is forgiveness? Most research has focused on the former, but I want to start with the latter and give you a question from a national survey. If you really forgive someone, you would want that person to be released from the consequences of their actions. By show of hands, who thinks that's very accurate? Some people. Somewhat accurate. Quite a number of people. And then I know the rest think it's not accurate. Well, nationally, this is what it looked like. Some 60% of people overall endorsed that statement as being somewhat accurate. I hope to convince you that you should really say it's not accurate, because I now want to move on to talking a little about forgiveness and to introduce some conceptual hygiene to our understanding of this everyday term. Forgiveness occurs as a response to a transgression that is either intentionally or negligently perpetrated. Notice that you have to fulfill the criteria of being responsible for the transgression in order for forgiveness to really be applicable. We don't forgive people for accidents unless they're negligently caused. Now, the common response to a transgression is immediate fear of being hurt again and/or anger. And we typically see 2 responses: either withdrawal or a seeking of revenge or retaliation. And some psychologists have said that retaliation is, quote, deeply ingrained in the biological, psychological, and cultural levels of human nature. So we have to overcome our nature in expressing forgiveness. So the response to a transgression is usually negative. So how one deals with this response is crucial. One way of responding is to ruminate over the hurt and to feel badly about it, and then to begin to nurture a grudge, which is very costly on you personally. Another response will be to exact revenge, but that's equally potentially costly, because with revenge, there is no end. Because once you take revenge, then the initial actor will want to take revenge on that act. And there is no end to revenge. So revenge is not a very adaptive way of dealing with transgressions. Is there a more adaptive response? Well, there's more than one, but I want to focus on forgiveness. And forgiveness occurs in the full knowledge that the transgressor is responsible for the injury that he or she caused, and as a result, forfeits any right to the victim's sympathy, affection, or trust. And that you have a right, you, the victim, have a right to feel resentful. But forgiveness involves working through, not avoiding that emotional pain, because being the victim of a transgression is painful, as we all know, because we've all been victims. Nobody in this room hasn't been. Hence, the Mahatma's statement, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. Because you have to work through the emotional pain and not avoid it, you have to be strong to forgive. Forgiveness is not something for the weak. We often hear forgive and forget. In fact, earlier at the dinner, I was told that in LDS literature, the deity forgives and forgets. Let us not usurp the deity's right, because that is a misconception. Forgive your enemies, but never forget their names. When we forgive, we do not forget. That is not part of forgiveness. Let us not try to usurp the deity and elevate ourselves to be a peer of the deity. We forgive and we remember. Let's get down to essentials. What is this thing we call forgiveness? I've just said it is not forgetting. It is not having no consequences for the perpetrator. It is not no longer feeling the pain. If you wait until the pain is gone, you are going to take a very long time to ever forgive the person. It is not about pretending that unacceptable behavior is in fact acceptable. We don't condone the wrong. The wrong is a wrong, and we forgive in full knowledge that we have been wronged and that we deserve better treatment. It is not about trust. Forgiving doesn't mean trusting the person. It is not about reconciling with the person. It's a confusion that is rampant in our culture, that if I forgive, I have to be reconciled to the person I'm forgiving. It is more like giving up the perceived right to get even. It's like giving up the attitude, you owe me. It is like a cancelled debt, but it's not quite debt cancellation, even though many scholars say it is. Because when you relinquish a debtor from a debt, the debt no longer exists. But when you forgive someone, it does not make it the case that a wrong was not done. So the analogy to cancelling a debt is not 100% sound. You forgive in the full knowledge and insistence that a wrong was done. It's more like an altruistic gift. A better way to characterize it is that it is intentional, unconditional, and supererogatory. You don't have to forgive. You go beyond the call of duty in forgiving. And it is more than an act. To say, I forgive you, is not forgiveness. Why? To say, I promise, is to make a promise, even if I intend not to keep the promise. The fact that I say, I promise I will get to the end of this lecture and decide to walk out right now, I made a promise, even if I knew I was going to walk out. In other words, when I make a promise, it is performative. But to say, I forgive you, does not constitute forgiveness, even if you fully intend to forgive the person. And why is this? Just look at our language. It makes sense. Does it make sense to say, I'll try to promise? No, it doesn't. Because to make a promise is performative. By saying, I promise, you have indeed done the act of promising. To say, I forgive, does not mean you've done the act of forgiving, because forgiveness is not an act. It's a process that takes place over time. That's why it makes sense in our language to say, I will try to forgive. So when somebody says, I forgive you, what the speaker is really doing is that they're signaling to you that they are going to try to forgive you, that they want to forgive you. But you, as a transgressor, what do you hear? Oh, good, it's over. Whew, I'm out of the dog box. And so statements of forgiveness can be inherently problematic, as I've just illustrated. But it gets worse. It gets a lot worse. It can also be problematic despite good intentions when the speaker is also unaware that the statement is not performative, that what they're really meaning is that they're going to try. If they're not aware of that, the two of you are in serious trouble. We can make genuinely meant statements poorly. We can execute our statements of forgiveness in a way that make them disasters. So it's possible for forgiveness to be seen and experienced as a put down. You can use forgiveness as a form of retaliation. You can use it as an attempt to humiliate the other person. I would argue all of those statements of forgiveness have nothing to do with forgiveness. And of course, don't forget that people can use statements of forgiveness strategically and hide their true feelings, something in the literature that is called hollow forgiveness, because the inner aspect of forgiveness is not occurring, only the outward words. Forgiveness is a response to being wronged that entails a change in which justified anger, resentment, indignation, all the rest is freely given up. To forgive entails a struggle. It's not something that just happens easily, because you have to overcome the negative feelings engendered by the transgression. And it's not easily achieved. In forgiveness, the transgressor receives an undeserved gift. And that's why we sometimes talk of forgiveness as being an altruistic act. Okay, now that I've told you what forgiveness is, I want to make sure that you fully understand what forgiveness is not. And this is my very favorite statement about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not the same as denial or foolishness. You may forgive someone and yet protect yourself from future harm by that person. So if you're the victim of spousal abuse, you may forgive the abuser. That doesn't mean you run back and put yourself in danger. That is foolishness. That is not forgiveness. You can forgive and keep your distance until that person who abused you earns your trust back. And then when it is safe and prudent, you may or may not choose to reconcile with them. Forgiveness is not forgetting. I can't stress this enough. Forgetting is just the passive removal of the offense from your consciousness. Forgetting often doesn't work because while you try to forget, it bothers you at some time you least expect it, and you get disrupted in your own behavior and thinking, and the two of you may be off to the races again. It is not condoning. When you forgive someone, you do not say that what they did to you was okay. You do not condone their behavior. Forgiveness annuls not the wrong. The wrong that they did to you will always be there. It is always a wrong. But what forgiveness does is it annuls the distorting effect that the wrong had upon your relationship with this person. Because when a person transgresses against you, they, by definition, are not honoring your status fully as a human being. They are treating you in a way that a human being should not be treated. They're putting you on a different level. And forgiveness deals with that distortion. It doesn't deal with the wrong itself. So now, forgiveness may reflect something about the forgiver. We all know there are some people who are just very good at forgiving. It sounds as though Sister Hinckley was one such person. That they forgive almost as quickly as the wrong is perpetrated. And some people have that gift. But if you're like me or like most normal mortals, that's not the case. But forgiveness can also reflect something about the person who transgressed against you. Maybe everybody forgives that person. So they may be a highly forgivable person. Or it could reflect something about the relationship between you and that person. And by the magic of very technical procedures that I'm not going to bore you with tonight, we as scientists can figure out how much of forgiveness is attributable to each of these elements. And I'll go straight to the result. Magic. There it is. What this graph does is show the amount of forgiveness that we can attribute to each of those three factors. On your left is men or husbands forgiving wives. You can see most of their forgiveness reflects the nature of the relationship they have with their wife, although a goodly portion reflects something about them as husbands. On your right is wives forgiving their husbands. You can see that for wives, the relationship is even more important for forgiveness. That wives actually partial some of their forgiveness on the nature of the husband, the person, their forgivability. And it also reflects something about them. So, men, when you're being forgiven by your wife, there's something about you that can facilitate that. It's only a little portion of it. But if you really want your wife to forgive you, work on the relationship part. So I just thought I'd share that with you, but let's get a little more practical now. And let's ask, does forgiveness really matter? I've already told you that a transgression can lead to fear and withdrawal, to anger and retaliation, revenge. These are unpleasant states that exact physiological toll. In fact, what you see here is a table that shows you what happens to your body when you do not forgive. If you ruminate or nurse a grudge, you will have a more negative experience. You will show more sympathetic nervous system activity, which means things like higher heart rate, greater galvanic skin response. You will experience increased systolic and diastolic blood pressure and mean arterial pressure, which is a reflection of arterial stiffness, which is not a good thing. Don't aim for that. You will also experience higher tonic eye and brow muscle tension. If you do that over time, if it's chronic, the anger and hostility that characterize ongoing vengeful thoughts can be linked to very serious health consequences. No surprise, given what I've just said about blood pressure, that you're more likely to experience heart disease, and that's the number one killer in the United States, and death. So I would plead with you tonight saying that unforgiveness or lack of forgiveness is nothing short of life-threatening. So if you want to live a long and fulfilling life, I would encourage you to find forgiveness as a way of life. Okay, so it turns out forgiveness is pretty important, not just for theological and religious reasons, but for your body. So if I can't convince you on any other grounds, maybe I can convince you on grounds of self-interest. But is it relevant to my relationship? After all, I have the best spouse in the world. Well, let's see. If we really want to love, says Mother Teresa, we must learn how to forgive. I agree with Mother Teresa. You cannot truly love unless you forgive. But, as the poet William Blake said, it is easier to forgive an enemy than to forgive a friend. I also agree with him. So forgiving those closest to you is actually harder than forgiving an acquaintance. Whichever position you take on these two seemingly contradictory statements, the fact of the matter is that a happy marriage is the union of two good forgivers. That was said by Robert Quillen in the 1930s, and he was the Garrison Keillor of his day. And I think there's a profound truth in this observation. A happy marriage is indeed the union of two good forgivers. Why? Well, first of all, before we address that, people in happy marriages who've been married for a long time report that one of the most important factors that has allowed them to experience these long happy marriages is the ability to grant and receive forgiveness. They list it as one of the top 5 attributes of their marriage. And forgiveness in relationships needs to be distinguished from reconciliation. There is no contradiction whatsoever in forgiving someone and at the same time ending the relationship. If that relationship is dangerous to you, you may choose to end it and at the same time forgive that person. Reconciliation can occur with or without forgiveness. When it occurs with forgiveness, forgiveness facilitates reconciliation. It's not the same as reconciliation. Do make sure that it is safe and prudent to reconcile. Remember, we do our forgiving alone inside our hearts and minds. What happens to the people we forgive depends on them. That's why forgiving is not the same as trusting the person again. You forgive them, then they have to behave in a way that earns your trust back. So those who are the transgressors, and we are all transgressors, when we are forgiven, remember, that doesn't put us back to the same status we had with the person. We have to show them that we are trustworthy again. Here's the paradox of close relationships such as marriage. We get our deepest affiliative needs fulfilled in our close romantic relationships. And it's a rare person who has never been hurt, betrayed, wronged, or let down by their partner. No community is exempt from this happening in partnerships, in marriages. So if you are going to be in a relationship, you are going to be hurt by your partner. That's something you can count on in your life. So forgiveness needs to be something that is available in that relationship. Because in those kinds of relationships, we make ourselves vulnerable. We share our deepest vulnerabilities with our intimate partners. And this allows us to experience increases in our own well-being as we share this intimacy with this wonderful spouse. But it also increases the chances that we are going to be hurt by this very wonderful spouse. Because no matter how wonderful your spouse is, they are not perfect. There was only one perfect person in history. I think you know what I'm talking about. And it's not your spouse. Just in case you were worrying. And so over the course of a relationship, alternatives to forgiveness, things like denial, condoning, reframing the transgression, just will not suffice. You will be hurt by your spouse, and it won't just occur once. Hopefully, over time, you will work out ways to deal with the hurts you inflict on each other. Now, there is consensus that forgiveness involves the diminution of resentment, anger, and retaliatory impulses, and so forth in the literature, that is overcome in forgiveness. I want to now make things a little trickier and say that's not it. That's not enough. It's not enough in ongoing close relationships. Not being mad does not equal the same as feeling positive. Equally fundamental to forgiveness, as the philosopher North reminds us, is an attitude of real goodwill towards the offender as a person. So forgiveness, I have argued, entails a positive or benevolent motivational state towards the harm doer. And that positive or benevolent motivational state is the basis for approaching the harm doer again, for reconciliation. So I'm arguing that forgiveness has at least two components: the diminution of negative retaliatory impulses and the increase in positive motivational states towards your harm doer. Two different things. And my work has shown that, in fact, there are these two different components to forgiveness. And here's something which is very helpful. It is the work of a colleague that shows do I have a pointer? Oh, there it is. Oh, just come back, please. Anyway, if you look over on the extreme right, those are people who said that they've completely forgiven the transgressor. But what you see there is the amount of unforgiveness they still harbor. There are on this 5-point scale from no forgiveness to complete forgiveness, look at the people who chose the number 2. Notice how much unforgiveness is still present, even though they say they've pretty much forgiven the person. So it is not, you are not somehow abnormal if, even in the state of forgiveness, you occasionally experience some unforgiving feelings towards your partner. We know that forgiveness is related to commitment in close relationships. We know it's related to closeness. These are positive relationships. It's related to relationship satisfaction. And it's also related to conflict resolution. Consider its importance. Consider victim and perpetrator perspectives when a transgression occurs. It turns out that both the perpetrator and the victim see things in a biased manner. Victims tend to overlook the details that facilitate forgiving. The pressure that the transgressor was under, for example. And they embellish memories with details that make forgiving more difficult. This is what the victim does. The perpetrator, on the other hand, embellishes the details that facilitate forgiving. They remember all the extenuating circumstances of the situation. So you can see the victim is going in a direction that's in the exact opposite to that of the perpetrator. I did some research on this and was able to replicate these victim-perpetrator differences, but show that in happy marriages, these biases are diminished. You still get the biases, but they are far less pronounced. And I also found data that's consistent with a causal sequence in which positive relationship quality leads to more benign interpretations of a transgression for both the victim and the perpetrator. That brings them closer together in their biases, which in turn promotes forgiveness. And this helps us to meet the challenge where the victim has to cancel a debt that is often perceived as bigger than the debt acknowledged by the transgressor. What about relationship satisfaction? Well, it seems as though the causal flow between forgiveness and relationship satisfaction is bidirectional. I'll get a little geeky on you now. Don't worry. I'm not going to give you model fit indices. You can relax. All I want to do is show you that marital quality at time 1 predicts forgiveness at time 2, and forgiveness at time 1 predicts marital quality at time 2. So those cross-layered correlations, the 0.25 and the 0.30, show that. So it seems as though there's a bidirectional relationship, that marital satisfaction and forgiveness feed off each other. Both can influence the other. What about marital conflict? Retaliation and avoidance among husbands is linked to wives' reported ineffective conflict resolution. Lack of forgiveness among wives is linked to husbands' reported ineffective conflict resolution. And wives' forgiveness predicts husbands' reported conflict resolution 12 months later. Forget all that. This is what I want you to remember. Unresolved conflict provides a potential mechanism that links less forgiveness to greater relationship dissatisfaction. Now, for those of you who know Ephesians and about going to bed in anger, can see that there's a profound truth here. Oh, I'm sorry, naughty me. I'm supposed to be secular. What determines forgiveness? Individual differences in agreeableness, attachment, security, emotional stability, extroversion, and higher self-esteem, the attributions or explanations we give for the offending behavior. Empathy has been shown to weaken negative motivations resulting from a wrong, and humility is hypothesized and is now being shown to facilitate forgiveness. And here's the good news. Most of these things are under volitional control, which leads me to my next point. Before I get there, though, two factors that make a huge difference in forgiveness, and that is the severity of the offense. More severe offenses are harder to forgive, and the transgressor's behavior following the offense. A sincere apology facilitates forgiveness. An insincere apology just puts you further into the dog's house. So, can forgiveness be taught? Can I become more forgiving? I'm going to go a little more practical on you now. Yes, you can, and I have 27 studies to prove it to you. I'm now going to go through them in order. Not. But what they do is, in 87% of the studies, the intervention consists of understanding what forgiveness is and is not, which helps you understand why I spend so much of my time on the conceptual hygiene of understanding what forgiveness is and is not. It is clear to me that we have all kinds of misconceptions about forgiveness in our society. 95% of the programs involve recalling the hurt, and 89% of them help the victim to empathize, to see what happened from the transgressor's point of view and what they were going through at the time. Now, I did something that you're not supposed to do as a scientist. I asked the question, can prayer increase forgiveness? And what we did is we had undergraduate students come into our laboratory and to describe their romantic partner to their parents, and there was a tape recorder there to record this. So they were speaking to an authority figure, or we had them pray for their partner for 3 minutes, just like they had to describe the partner to the parent for 3 minutes. And what we subsequently found when we measured it was that those who had prayed were more forgiving of a partner transgression than those who had just described the partner. Oh, very nice. That's that artificial social psychology, isn't it? You bring people into a laboratory, you do funny things to them, and you expect me to believe that? Good on you. Don't believe it. So that's why we then did a diary study where we randomly assigned people to one of 3 conditions. One condition, they had to pray for their partner every day, or they engaged in whatever prayers they normally engaged in every day. And in the third condition, they had to engage in positive thoughts about their partner each day. So we said, spend about 3 minutes each day doing your activity. People were randomly assigned. And I want to share with you the instructions we gave them so you get a feel for what they did in the pray for partner condition. Read this example prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for all the things that are going well in my life and in my relationship. Please continue to protect and guide my partner, providing strength and direction every day. I know you are the source of all good things. Please bring those good things to my partner and make me a blessing in my partner's life. Amen. They read that, and we said, that's the kind of prayer we want you to pray each day. We didn't give them this prayer to take home because we wanted them to generate their own prayers. And guess what we found? After 4 weeks, the only group that showed greater forgiveness were those who prayed for their partner. Those who engaged in their normal prayer were no different from those who just had positive thoughts about their partner. So my message in this part of the talk is not about prayer in general. It's about a particular kind of prayer, colloquial, intercessory prayer for your partner. It is not the prayer, Lord, please help him to change, because you know how annoying he is. Or, you know, Lord, I've put up with her for so long. I know she's going to go sometime. Don't you think you could bring the schedule forward a bit? You know, actually, this afternoon would suit me really well. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a specific kind of prayer that is focused on the other person, but is only focused on good things that are requested for the other person. People of faith know why I got those results, although you're probably a little surprised by the undirected normal prayer. But submit that to a journal. Results, discussion, a miracle occurred, the end. I can guarantee you with 100% certainty your paper will not be published. We hypothesized how this effect might actually occur, and we were able to show some evidence that prayer brings you into the presence of a greater selfless love, agape, and it's that agape which led to greater forgiveness. But I'm getting too technical or too researchy on you. I want to go back to being practical. Let's look at forgiveness in action. This is what I hope will be really meaningful to you. Forgiveness is a day-to-day attitude of graciousness. You don't demand perfection. It's marked by kindness and a generosity of spirit. And you can have a structured plan to be like that for specific wounds that you suffer in your relationship. And don't tell me that you don't suffer wounds in your marriage. They may not be deep, but you surely suffer some wounds. So what might the structured plan be like? Some preliminaries first. Be empathic. See things through your partner's eyes. Accept that your partner's views and memory are most likely to differ from yours, and that they don't have to agree with your view of events for you to forgive them. Your hurt and your pain is most salient for you. For your spouse, the extenuating circumstances are most salient. So your spouse is thinking, why are you making such a big deal about this? It wasn't that big a deal. I was under pressure. Try and have these things be happening. And also, see your partner for the whole person that they are. Hate the sin, but love the sinner. Oh. I'm so sorry for my misbehavior. There's more to the offender than the offending behavior. Try to see that more. What they did to you is only one little part of who they are and how they behave. Remember that one of the greatest dangers is the statement, I forgive you. What it is a beginning of a process. And make sure that if you convey forgiveness verbally to your spouse, you're very careful about how you convey it. I would like to forgive you. I really would. And I'm going to try my best to do that. So that they can't hear it as, I forgive you. It's over. At last. Be patient. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with your partner. Human emotions are not things that you can just switch on and off. And your feelings of hurt may linger longer than you would like. Be patient. Set an agenda to work on the issue in question with your partner. Fully explore the pain and concerns related to this issue for both of you. There is no quick fix for serious offenses in a relationship. This phase takes a lot of time. You may have 5, 10, 15, 20 conversations about the event. The offended needs to explore the situation on his or her own, as well as having many discussions with the offender over a period of time. Trying to move through this phase too quickly can be worse than doing nothing at all. You can't just switch on forgiveness unless you're one of those wonderful people who sort of has that as part of your nature. set the agenda to work on the issue, as I've said. The offender apologizes and asks for forgiveness. So in these discussions, if you're the offender, you need to be humble, admit to your wrong, ask for forgiveness, and sincerely apologize. And you may have to do that 5, 10, 15 times. Because asking for forgiveness demonstrates a willingness on your part to take responsibility for your behavior. But more importantly, it validates the pain of the other person. And this is, if it's a person you love, surely you want to validate their pain. So this may occur many times and in many ways. The offended, at some point, agrees to forgive. Remember, this is a process and not an event. So when the offended person agrees to forgive, that is not forgiveness. That is just a signaling of a willingness to try to forgive. Recall times, if you're the offended person, when you needed to be forgiven. There is nothing more humbling in my experience than to remember the times I've needed to be forgiven. It makes my hurt and my unwillingness to forgive seem really, really small and petty of me. Being self-righteous hinders forgiveness. Being humble, remembering the many people who've forgiven you in your life, can help you forgive others. So the offended agrees to forgive. Both of you make a positive commitment to change if there are recurrent patterns. So if this is the second time that the same kind of event has occurred, or even if it's the first time, make a commitment that it's not going to happen again. Remember, forgiveness is not placing yourself in danger. That's stupidity. And then you move forward after this process that can occur over a relatively short period of time, maybe if it's a minor transgression. But for a serious transgression, it's going to take much longer. So, forgiveness often takes many discussions and a lot of work by both the victim and the offending spouse. They have to work on this as a couple, but also as individuals. Now, should the issue come up after you've been through this process in a conflict, all is not lost. It simply means you are human. Be gentle on yourself. Even highly motivated partners who have in their minds forgiven may find themselves in circumstances with their spouse or partner where some action they take reminds them of that hurt, and it all comes welling up again, and they might be unreasonable, and then the offending partner doesn't know what's going on. And then you say, well, I'm still so hurt by what you did, 3 years ago. Are you still thinking about that? My goodness. No. Be gentle on yourselves. If it comes up again, and it's most likely to come up in conflict, know that all is not lost. And for goodness sakes, whatever you do, don't try to move through forgiveness too quickly, because you'll only be kidding yourself. So, does forgiveness always facilitate a healthy relationship? Well, unfortunately, despite what I've said so far, it depends. It depends on the state of the existing relationship between you and the other person. Here are some data from a colleague of mine, Jim McNulty, who studied a newlywed sample in the first year of marriage. Look at what he found. We have people in less hostile and more hostile marriages. And we have much forgiveness and less forgiveness. The solid bars are much forgiveness. And what you see on the y-axis is decrease in marital satisfaction. You can see that in less hostile relationships, people who forgive are much better off. They have a very small decrease in their marital satisfaction. Because we all know your marital satisfaction is really high when you first get married, and then it's downhill, slowly, slowly, slowly. First child, a little bit more, and then it peaks up again when all the kids are gone. Yeah. Okay, back to this. You can see that people who were very forgiving in hostile relationships ended up worse off than people who weren't forgiving. So that's a little warning that forgiveness may not always work out in the best possible way. I think what's happening with these data, and what the author himself now is thinking, is that in those more hostile relationships, forgiveness was seen as permission to continue being hostile. So forgive, but hold your spouse to the standards of civil, decent behavior, to treat you with the respect that you deserve. And it may depend on your understanding of forgiveness. If you think being forgiving is a sign of weakness, it may not be so good for you. But I hope nobody in this room is going to go away with that thought about forgiveness. Dangers. What should I watch out for? Remember the victim versus perpetrator perspectives. Victims magnify, perpetrators minimize. And both of them are right. But what it results in is that the amends made are seen as disproportionate by both the victim and by the offender. The other person is always in the position of being seen as unreasonable, and both of you are right. But if you understand this bias, you can perhaps get beyond it, because both people are right in their perspectives. And the act is not a complete process. I forgive you is not forgiveness. I cannot stress this enough. It really means I've decided to try and forgive you. And it's part of a process, the beginning of it. The aggrieved person may frequently be reminded of the harm resulting from a specific act by the partner's behavior, because it can be viewed symbolically. And here we need to distinguish between specific hurts in a relationship and hurtful relationships. If you're in a relationship where there's consistent hurt all the time, then forgiveness doesn't involve forgiveness of a specific hurt. It involves forgiveness for a hurtful relationship, and maybe the grounds for your thinking very seriously about whether this is a relationship that should continue. And finally, forgiveness is a sort of thing that one does for a reason. And where there are reasons, there is a distinction between good ones and bad ones. People can forgive strategically to manipulate. You can forgive for good reasons, and you can forgive for bad reasons. Partner transgressions put you in a position of moral superiority vis-a-vis your partner. This position can be abused. Just don't do it. You may be on your high moral horse. Step down, because you're not going to go anywhere on that horse. It's crippled. If it takes you anywhere, it's going to be to a bad place. And forgiving out of felt obligation, and this I want to stress to this audience, is not as beneficial as forgiveness freely given. Now, it's especially relevant to people of faith who feel that they're obligated to forgive because of their faith. People who forgive out of obligation don't experience optimally the benefits of forgiveness. You forgive because you choose to do it, not because you feel obliged to do it, if you want to really benefit from it. And if this is what happens in your relationship, I hope that you will now be equipped to end up here. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your questions. We really do want to thank Dr. Fincham for being this year's lecturer, and we do have a small token of our affection. We'd like to present you this clock, on which we've engraved the Marjorie Pay Hinckley Lecture 2013. This is a token of our appreciation.
Sorry, I just want to say a very brief word of thanks for having me, and also to say how appropriate this is, because my favorite Latin phrase that I use it as the end of some of my emails is tempus fugit. So thank you very much.